The academy was one of the most respected schools in the known galaxy. Students from dozens of worlds came there to learn, to grow, and to find their place among the stars. The halls were wide and bright, built to hold beings of every shape and size. Some students had 4 legs. Some had wings folded tight against their backs. Some breathed through gills and carried small water tanks on their shoulders. It was a place of many kinds, and most days, it was peaceful. Aaron walked into his morning class and dropped into his usual seat at the back of the room. He was a young human, not very tall, not very wide. He had short brown hair, an old jacket that had seen better days, and a small notebook that he carried everywhere. He was not the kind of person who stood out in a crowd. Most of his classmates barely noticed him. He liked it that way. He opened his notebook, clicked his pen, and waited for the lesson to begin. The room filled up slowly. Students filed in one by one, chatting quietly, finding their seats. There were Cellari students with their pale blue skin and wide silver eyes. There were Mori students, small and quick, with 4 thin arms that moved constantly. There was a Bravan student near the window, tall and gray, sitting very still the way Bravans always did. It was a normal morning. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. Then the door opened again. The room went quiet. Not slowly, not gradually. It went quiet all at once, like someone had cut the sound from the air. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes, no matter the shape or color, moved toward the door. The being that walked in was called Drax. He was from a species known as the Varek, and the Varek were not the kind of people you forgot once you had seen them. Drax stood well over 7 feet tall. His body was covered in dark gray scales that caught the light like polished stone. His shoulders were broad. His hands were large, with thick fingers that ended in short, blunt claws. His face was angular and hard, with 2 deep-set yellow eyes that moved slowly around the room, taking everything in without any hurry. He wore no uniform. He carried no bag. He simply walked in, looked around once, and moved toward an empty seat near the middle of the room. Nobody breathed. The Cellari student closest to the door pressed back into her chair. One of the Mori students grabbed the edge of the desk with all 4 hands. The Bravan near the window, who never showed emotion, had gone a shade paler than usual. Even the instructor, a calm and experienced Fenari named Soren, had stopped moving. He stood at the front of the room with a data pad in one hand, and he was very still. Everyone knew the name Drax. Or rather, everyone knew what the name meant. Varek warriors had a reputation that spread across star systems. They were hunters by nature, fighters by history, and Drax in particular had a story that had moved through the academy like smoke before he even arrived. He had come from somewhere difficult. He had done things that were not talked about in polite company. The details were unclear, but the feeling they left behind was not. When people heard his name, they felt something cold move through them. And now he was here. In a classroom. Sitting down. The chair creaked under his weight. He placed both hands flat on the desk in front of him and looked straight ahead, his yellow eyes calm and unreadable. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then, from the back of the room, there was a small sound. A pen clicked. Aaron looked up from his notebook. He looked at Drax the way a person looks at someone who has just sat down on a bus. Mildly curious. Relaxed. He gave a small nod, the kind you give to a stranger you have no problem with, and then he looked back down at his notes and kept writing. That was it. That was all he did. But somehow, that small and simple thing was the strangest thing that had happened in the room all morning. The Cellari student near the door stared at Aaron like he had lost his mind. One of the Mori students turned all 4 of his hands toward Aaron instead of Drax, as if the human had suddenly become the more confusing problem. Even Instructor Soren blinked, looked at Aaron, and then looked at Drax, and then looked at Aaron again. Drax noticed too. His yellow eyes moved slowly to the back of the room. They found Aaron sitting there with his pen in his hand, head down, writing something in his notebook like nothing at all had just walked through the door. Drax watched him for a moment. Then he looked away. The lesson began, though not smoothly. Instructor Soren cleared his throat twice before his voice came out properly. He pulled up the lesson on the display and began talking about interspecies communication history, but his words felt thin and distant, like he was speaking from behind glass. Most of the students were not listening. They were watching Drax. Or they were watching Aaron. Or they were watching the door, measuring the distance to it in case they needed it. Aaron was the only one in the room who seemed to actually be following along. His pen moved steadily across the page. When Soren asked a question about early galactic contact protocols, Aaron answered it without looking up, got it right, and went back to writing. Drax turned his head slightly at the sound of Aaron's voice. He looked at him again. Just for a second. Then he faced forward once more. By the time the first hour of class was done, the room had settled just barely enough to function. Students were still tense. Some had not moved from their original positions at all. But the class had continued, and Drax had done nothing except sit, and breathe, and exist in the space he was given. When the session ended and students began to gather their things, the movement was quick and nervous. Most of them were out the door in under a minute, walking fast, talking in low urgent voices once they were safely in the hall. Aaron stayed behind a moment to finish a note he was writing. He closed his notebook, tucked it under his arm, and stood up. He glanced once more at Drax, who was still sitting, in no particular hurry to go anywhere. Aaron gave the same small nod he had given at the start of class. Then he walked out the door, calm and easy, like it was just another morning. Behind him, Drax sat very still. His yellow eyes were fixed on the empty doorway where the human had just been. Something moved behind them, quiet and hard to name. Confusion, maybe. Or the beginning of something else entirely. The next morning came gray and quiet. The academy halls were already filling up with students moving between classes, carrying bags and data pads, talking in small groups. The noise was normal. The movement was normal. But underneath all of it, something had changed. Everyone was watching. Not openly. Not in a way that could be pointed at. But in the careful, sideways way that people watch something they are not sure about. Every time Drax moved through a hallway, students found reasons to step aside. Conversations dropped to nothing when he passed. Chairs scraped back a little further when he entered a room. The academy had hosted difficult students before, students from warrior species, students with complicated histories, but nobody quite like this. Nobody who carried so much weight in simply walking through a door. And then there was Aaron. Aaron moved through the same halls and nobody stepped aside for him. Nobody went quiet. He was just there, same jacket, same notebook, same unhurried pace. He stopped at the water station near the east corridor and filled his bottle. He held the door open for a Mori student who was struggling with an armful of materials. He yawned once, loudly, outside the main lecture hall, and a Cellari girl nearby gave him a look, and he smiled at her and shrugged, and she turned away shaking her head. He was completely ordinary. And right now, in this academy, that was the most extraordinary thing about him. It started small, the way these things always do. The second day of class, Drax arrived early. He took the same seat as before, in the middle of the room, and he waited. When Aaron walked in and moved to the back, Drax turned his head and looked at him. Not quickly. Slowly, deliberately, the way a predator watches something cross an open field. His yellow eyes stayed on Aaron for a long moment. Aaron glanced up, saw Drax looking, and gave a small nod. Then he sat down and opened his notebook. Drax looked away. His jaw tightened just slightly. The third day, Drax moved his seat. He chose a spot closer to the back, one row ahead of Aaron and one seat to the left. Close enough that Aaron would feel it. Close enough that most beings would feel their heart rate climb and their instincts start screaming at them to move. Aaron sat down behind him, looked at the new arrangement for half a second, and then took out his pen and wrote the date at the top of a clean page. The Mori student 2 rows over saw the whole thing and spent the rest of the class barely blinking. By the fourth day, Drax had decided to be less subtle. He was waiting in the corridor outside the classroom when Aaron turned the corner. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, arms at his sides, taking up space the way only very large beings can. His yellow eyes found Aaron the moment he appeared, and he held them there, unblinking, heavy with intention. Every other student in the corridor found somewhere else to be within about 10 seconds. They peeled away quietly, quickly, pressing against walls and ducking into side passages. The hall emptied out like water draining from a bowl. Aaron walked forward. He did not slow down. He did not speed up. He walked at exactly the same pace he always walked, and when he got close enough, he stopped, looked up at Drax with calm, mild eyes, and said, "Morning." Then he stepped around him and went into the classroom. Drax stood in the empty hallway for a moment. Then he followed. Word spread fast. By midday, half the academy knew that the human had walked straight at Drax in an empty corridor and said good morning. The story grew a little with each telling, the way stories do. By the afternoon version, Aaron had apparently smiled the whole time. By the evening version, he had apparently patted Drax on the arm. Neither of these things had happened, but the truth was strange enough on its own that people were willing to believe almost anything. The whispers split into two camps. One camp said Aaron was brave. The other camp said he was simply not understanding the situation properly, that he did not fully grasp what Drax was, what Drax had done, what Drax was capable of. This camp said it with a kind of nervous pity, the way you feel for someone walking too close to the edge of something high. But nobody went up to Aaron and said any of this directly. That would have meant getting close to the conversation, and that conversation lived too near to Drax for comfort. On the fifth day, Drax sat down directly beside Aaron. Not 1 seat away. Not across the aisle. Right beside him, close enough that his broad shoulder was only a few inches from Aaron's. The desk between them looked small and fragile by comparison. The students nearby relocated without a word, taking their things and finding seats at the far end of the room with the quiet urgency of people who had made a sensible decision. Aaron did not relocate. He looked at the large gray figure that had just settled beside him, and then he looked back at his notebook, and then he paused, and turned back to Drax with a look of mild curiosity. "You need to borrow a pen?" he asked. Drax stared at him. "I have a spare," Aaron said, and held one out. The room was so silent that the hum of the ventilation system was suddenly very loud. Drax looked at the pen. It was a small, cheap, ordinary pen. It looked absurdly small, held between Aaron's fingers, extended toward a being who could have snapped the desk in half without much effort. Drax did not take it. He looked at Aaron's face instead, searching for something. Fear, maybe. Some crack in the surface. Some small sign that the human was performing, that underneath the calm there was something shaking. There was nothing. Aaron's eyes were steady and open, his expression easy. He was not performing anything. He was just sitting there, offering a pen, waiting to see if it was wanted. Drax looked away. He said nothing. Aaron set the pen on the edge of the desk between them, in case it was needed, and went back to his notes. Instructor Soren began the lesson with the careful energy of someone teaching class next to a very large storm and choosing to focus on the board. After class, as students flooded quickly out of the room, a Cellari girl named Mia caught up with Aaron in the hallway. She had been watching all week. She could not help herself anymore. "Are you not scared?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Aaron thought about it for a second, genuinely considered the question, and then shook his head. "Not really," he said. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the classroom door. Then she looked at Aaron again. "I think," she said slowly, "that you might be the strangest person in this school." Aaron smiled at that. It was a small, easy smile. "I get that sometimes," he said, and walked off down the hall. Behind them, through the classroom door, Drax sat alone at the desk. The spare pen was still sitting on the edge where Aaron had left it. Drax looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up. Turned it once in his large fingers. And set it down again. His yellow eyes were unreadable. But something behind them was working quietly, turning something over, trying to find the shape of a question it did not yet know how to ask. It was a Tuesday when Lena finally decided she had waited long enough. She had been watching Aaron for 6 days. 6 days of watching him walk calmly through corridors that emptied when Drax was near. 6 days of watching him sit beside the most feared being in the academy and take out his notebook like it was the most natural thing in the world. 6 days of watching him nod, and smile, and offer pens, and answer questions in class while everyone else sat frozen and pale. She could not take it anymore. Lena was a Cellari, which meant she was quick and sharp and noticed things that others missed. Her silver eyes caught details. Her mind held on to them. She had built up a full picture of Aaron over the past week, and the picture made no sense to her, and that bothered her more than Drax did. Drax she understood. Drax was dangerous, and dangerous things were frightening, and that was a clean and simple equation. Aaron did not fit into any equation she knew. She found him at the end of the morning break, sitting alone on a low bench near the academy garden, eating something wrapped in paper and reading his notebook at the same time. The garden was quiet at this hour. A few students passed at a distance, but nobody came close. Most people had unconsciously started avoiding any space that Aaron occupied regularly, as if his strange calmness was something that might be contagious, or worse, might attract something large and gray and yellow-eyed. Lena sat down beside him without asking. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him directly. Aaron looked up from his notebook. He seemed unsurprised to see her. He offered a small nod, the same nod he gave to everyone, and went back to eating. "I need to ask you something," Lena said. "All right," said Aaron. "Why are you not afraid of him?" She did not say the name. She did not need to. There was only one him that anyone was talking about this week. Aaron finished chewing, folded the paper wrapping over the rest of his food, and set it down on the bench beside him. He thought for a moment, not in a way that suggested he was stalling, but in the honest way of someone who wanted to give a real answer instead of a quick one. "What would being afraid do for me?" he asked. Lena blinked. "It would be a normal response," she said. "He is Varek. Do you know what Varek are? Do you know what they are capable of?" "I know some," Aaron said. "Then how are you calm?" Aaron leaned back slightly and looked at the garden for a moment. There were small blue plants growing along the far wall, something that had been brought from a water world somewhere and had adapted well to the academy's controlled environment. He looked at them the way he looked at most things, with quiet, easy attention. "My planet tried to kill us," he said. "Not just a little. Constantly. From the very beginning." He looked back at Lena. The animals were dangerous. The weather was dangerous. The ground itself in some places was dangerous. Humans have been living inside a threat their entire existence. Every generation. The whole history of our species. Lena was quiet. She was listening. "And we learned something," Aaron continued. "Panic does not help. When something dangerous is in front of you and you panic, you stop thinking. You make bad choices. You freeze, or you run the wrong way, or you do something that makes the situation worse." He picked up his food again and unwrapped it a little more. The humans who survived were not always the strongest ones. They were the ones who could stay calm and think clearly while everything around them was going wrong. So you are not afraid because you trained yourself not to be? Lena asked. Not exactly, Aaron said. It is more like, I grew up understanding that fear is just information. It tells you something is near that might hurt you. That is useful. But once you have that information, you have to think. You cannot just feel it and let it run you. Lena turned this over in her mind. It was a strange way to think about fear. Her people felt fear the way most species did, as something that took over, something that moved your body before your mind could catch up. The idea of receiving it like a message and then setting it aside was almost impossible for her to picture. But he is not just any threat, she said carefully. He has a history. People have said things about what he has done. People say a lot of things, Aaron said. He was not dismissive when he said it. His voice was even and thoughtful. I do not know his history. I only know what I have seen. And what I have seen is someone sitting in a classroom, trying to exist in a place that is not very comfortable for him. Lena stared at him. You feel sorry for him? I did not say that, Aaron said. I see a person. That is all. Whatever he has done before, right now he is a student in a class. Same as me. He paused. I am not going to treat him like a monster based on what other people are afraid of. The garden was very quiet around them. Somewhere above, a small creature that lived in the academy roof made a soft sound and went still again. Lena looked at Aaron for a long time. She was looking at him differently now. Not with the mild, puzzled attention she had been giving him all week, but with something sharper. Something more careful. She thought about what he had just said. About a planet that tried to kill its own people. About generations of humans learning to stay calm inside danger. About a species that had been shaped, over thousands of years, by the simple brutal fact that panic got you killed. She thought about the fact that Aaron had walked straight toward Drax in an empty hallway without slowing down. That he had sat beside him in class without moving his chair an inch further away. That he had offered a pen with a steady hand and a relaxed face. And she thought about the fact that none of that was performance. None of it was bravado. He was not trying to prove something. He genuinely did not feel the thing that every other being in the academy was feeling. That, she realized slowly, was not just unusual. That was something else entirely. She stood up from the bench. She straightened her jacket and looked down at Aaron, who had gone back to his food and his notebook without any fanfare. Thank you, she said, quietly. For explaining. Sure, said Aaron, without looking up. She walked away across the garden path, her silver eyes forward, her mind still turning everything over. Behind her, Aaron sat in the quiet and read his notes and finished his lunch, unbothered and unhurried. But Lena did not look back. She was too busy thinking about something that had only just become clear to her. In this academy, every student was afraid of Drax. And Drax, she was beginning to suspect, might be the only one with a good reason to be careful around Aaron. The courtyard sat at the center of the academy, open to the sky above and surrounded on all four sides by tall stone walls covered in climbing plants from a dozen different worlds. At midday it filled with students eating and talking and moving between classes. It was usually one of the warmer, easier places in the academy. A place where things felt lighter. That Wednesday, it did not feel light at all. Aaron was crossing the courtyard on his way to the afternoon session when he heard it. Not loud. Not obvious. But something in the quality of the silence that had gathered near the far wall caught his attention the way silences sometimes do when they are the wrong shape for the space they are filling. He stopped walking. He looked. There were 5 of them. Older students, 3rd or 4th year, from different species but moving together with the easy confidence of a group that had decided something ahead of time. They had placed themselves in a loose curve around Drax, who was standing with his back close to the wall. Not pressed against it. Drax was not the kind of being who pressed against walls. But he was contained. Surrounded on the open sides, wall behind him, the five of them forming a shape that said very clearly that this conversation was not optional. The largest of the group was a Brenkai, nearly as tall as Drax but wider, with a flat heavy face and arms that hung long at his sides. His name was not something Aaron knew, but his posture was readable in any language. He was leaning slightly forward, chin lifted, the universal shape of someone who has decided they are in charge of this moment. He was talking. Aaron was too far to hear the words clearly, but the tone carried. Low and deliberate. The kind of voice that is not asking questions. The other students in the courtyard had noticed. They had done what students always do in these situations. They had drifted to the edges. Moved their conversations to the far side of the open space. Turned slightly away while keeping their eyes angled back. Nobody left entirely. Nobody came closer. The courtyard had arranged itself into the shape of an audience that was pretending not to watch. Drax had not moved. His arms were at his sides. His yellow eyes were fixed on the Brenkai in front of him, flat and still. He was not afraid. That was clear. But he was also not doing anything, and that itself was interesting. A being with his reputation, cornered against a wall by 5 students who had clearly come looking for a result, and he was standing still. Aaron watched for another second. Then he started walking toward them. He did not walk fast. He did not pull himself up or set his jaw or do anything that announced what he was doing. He simply changed direction and walked across the courtyard at the same unhurried pace he used for everything, hands easy at his sides, notebook tucked under one arm. A Mori student near the edge of the crowd saw him moving and grabbed a friend's sleeve. The friend looked. Then they both went very still. Aaron reached the group and stopped just outside the loose curve the 5 older students had made. He stood there quietly for a moment, looking at the situation the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand clearly before they speak. The Brenkai noticed him. He turned his flat heavy face toward Aaron and looked at him the way large people sometimes look at small interruptions. With a kind of slow, dismissive attention. "Walk away, first year," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried. Certain. Aaron did not walk away. He looked at the Brenkai with calm, steady eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at each of the others in turn. One by one. The same quiet, level attention for each of them. It was not a threatening look. It was not an angry look. It was simply the look of someone who was paying close attention and was not in any hurry and was not going anywhere. It lasted only a few seconds. But those few seconds had a weight to them. "This does not need to happen," Aaron said. His voice was not loud. He did not raise it even slightly. But it was even and clear and it carried in the quiet of the courtyard. The Brenkai tilted his head. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite uncertainty, but the early edge of it. "This is not your business," he said. "Maybe not," Aaron said. "But I am here now." He took one step forward. Just one. Unhurried. Steady. He was still smaller than every other being in that circle by a significant amount. He was still holding a notebook under his arm. He looked, from any reasonable angle, like someone who should not have been walking toward this situation at all. But he had walked toward it. And he had stopped at exactly the distance he chose, not the distance anyone else had set for him. And he was standing there with the kind of stillness that did not come from being unaware of the danger. It came from something else. Something harder to name and harder to move. The Brenkai looked at him. Really looked. His eyes moved over Aaron the way you measure something before you decide what to do with it. And something in what he found there made the forward lean of his posture change. Not much. Just slightly. Just enough. One of the others in the group, a wiry Cellari on the left side of the curve, shifted his weight. It was a small movement. But it was backward. Aaron looked at the Brenkai again. Whatever point you are trying to make, he said, still quiet, still even, it is not going to land the way you think it will. Not today. Nobody spoke. The courtyard was holding its breath. Then the Brenkai straightened up. He looked at Aaron for another moment. Then he looked at Drax. Then he made a short, low sound that was not quite a word and turned away. The others followed him, not quickly, not in a way that looked like running. But they went. One by one, peeling away, moving back into the general flow of the courtyard until they were just students again, walking somewhere, nothing to see. The courtyard exhaled. Aaron watched them go. Then he turned and looked at Drax. Drax had not moved the entire time. He was still standing with his back near the wall, his yellow eyes fixed on Aaron. His face was unreadable. His arms were still at his sides. Aaron gave him the same small nod he always gave. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come, the same pace, the same easy movement, like he was just crossing a courtyard on the way to class. Which, in fact, he was. Drax watched him go. He watched until Aaron had crossed the full width of the courtyard and disappeared through the far doorway. Then he looked at the ground in front of him. Something had shifted. Not loudly. Not in a way that could be easily described. But somewhere behind the flat and careful surface that Drax wore like armor, something that had been hard for a very long time had moved. Just slightly. Just enough to let something else in. He did not have a word for it yet. But it was there. It was early Thursday morning when Drax found Aaron. Not in the classroom. Not in the corridor. Aaron was sitting outside on the long stone steps that ran along the east side of the academy building, the quiet side, the side that faced away from the main grounds and looked out over a stretch of open land that rolled gently toward the horizon. The sky above was pale and wide. The air was cool. Nobody else was out here at this hour. Most students were still inside, eating breakfast or getting ready for the first session of the day. Aaron had his notebook open on his knee. He was not writing in it. He was just sitting, looking out at the open land, with a small cup of something warm held in both hands. He heard the footsteps before Drax appeared. They were heavy and slow and deliberate, the kind of steps that knew where they were going. Aaron did not turn around. He waited. Drax came around the corner of the building and stopped when he saw Aaron sitting there. He looked at him for a moment. Then he walked over and stood a few feet away, looking out at the same stretch of land. Neither of them spoke for a little while. The morning was quiet around them. Somewhere out on the open ground a small creature moved through the low grass and disappeared. The sky shifted slowly from pale to a soft and early blue. Then Drax spoke. "Why did you do that?" he said. It was not quite a question. It was flat and direct, the way Varric spoke when they wanted a real answer and not a polite one. Aaron looked up at him. Then he looked back out at the land. "Someone should have done it sooner," he said. Drax was quiet for a moment. "That is not a reason," he said. "Yes it is," Aaron said simply. Drax looked at him. Aaron met his eyes without any difficulty and without any performance. Just looked back, steady and open, the way he always did. Drax moved to the steps and sat down. Not right beside Aaron. A little further along, leaving space between them. He was so large that even sitting he was nearly at Aaron's eye level. He rested his arms on his knees and looked out at the horizon. "I did not need your help," he said. "I know," Aaron said. "Then why?" Aaron thought about it honestly. He turned the cup in his hands, feeling the warmth of it. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "And because nobody else was going to." Drax made a low sound. Not quite agreement. Not quite dismissal. Something in between. "Your people are strange," he said. We get that a lot, Aaron said. Another silence settled between them. But it was a different kind of silence than the ones that had existed around Drax all week. Those silences had been tight and fearful, full of held breath and careful distance. This one was looser. It had room in it. Where I come from, Drax said after a while, you do not step into another person's situation. It is weakness. It means you cannot trust the other person to handle their own ground. Where I come from, Aaron said, you step in because leaving someone alone in a bad situation when you could do something about it is the thing that is hard to live with afterward. Drax turned his head and looked at Aaron. Even for a stranger. Even for a stranger, Aaron said. Drax looked back at the horizon. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again his voice was a little different. Not softer exactly. But less guarded. Like something had shifted in the way he was choosing to use it. My world was not easy, he said. I figured, Aaron said. He did not say it with pity. He said it the way you acknowledge something real. From the beginning you are taught that only strength matters. That anything that looks like feeling is a crack in the wall. That you survive by being harder than everything around you. He paused. I believed that for a long time. Aaron nodded slowly. Did it work? He asked. Drax thought about that. Really thought about it, in a way that took a moment. It kept me alive, he said finally. It did not keep me whole. Aaron looked at him. There was nothing dramatic in his expression. No exaggerated sympathy. Just attention. Real, quiet attention. My world tried to kill us too, Aaron said. Different way. But the same idea. Everything around you is a threat and you either get hard or you get dead. He turned the cup once more in his hands. Humans got hard. But we also figured out early that we needed each other to survive. You cannot last alone on a planet like ours. So we learned to be tough and to hold on to each other at the same time. Drax absorbed this. That sounds like a contradiction, he said. Maybe, Aaron said. But it works. The sun had come up enough now that the open land in front of them was lit in long warm lines. The pale blue of the early sky had deepened. A group of birds from some imported species crossed overhead in a loose and wandering line. Why did you come here? Aaron asked. Not accusingly. Just asking. To the academy. Drax was quiet for a moment. Because I was tired, he said. Of the other thing. Of what I was doing and what it was making me. He looked down at his large hands resting on his knees. I thought if I came somewhere like this. Somewhere with books and lessons and different kinds of people. Maybe I could figure out what else there is. Aaron nodded. That is a good reason, he said. The others here do not think I belong, Drax said. The others here are scared, Aaron said. That is different from being right. Drax looked at him again. That same searching look he had been giving Aaron all week, the one that was always hunting for something hidden underneath the surface. And again, like every time before, he found nothing hidden. Just a person sitting on some steps in the early morning, saying what he meant and meaning what he said. You are very unusual, Drax said. So I have been told, Aaron said. He smiled. It was small and easy and completely genuine. For the first time since he had arrived at the academy, something moved across Drax's face that was not hardness and was not caution. It was brief and quiet and a little uncertain, like something that had not been used in a long time and was not sure yet of its own shape. But it was there. They sat together on the steps for a while longer, talking about small things and sometimes not talking at all, and the morning opened up around them warm and unhurried. Two beings from two hard worlds, shaped by very different kinds of difficulty, sitting in the same quiet and finding, without either of them having planned for it, that the space between them had somewhere along the way become comfortable. When the bell rang for the first session and they both stood up to go inside, Drax fell into step beside Aaron without thinking about it. Aaron did not remark on it. He just walked, the same pace as always. They went through the door together. Behind them, a small group of students who had gathered near the corner of the building watched them go with wide and wordless eyes. Nobody quite knew what to make of it. But somewhere in the academy that morning, the most feared student and the calmest human walked side by side down a bright corridor, and neither of them was alone anymore.